Hi, everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. For those of you that I have not met, my name is John Gomez. I'm the Chief Security and Engineering Officer here at CloudWave. So this presentation is somewhat of a State of the Union. I'm going to look back at 2023 and some lessons learned, actually go much further beyond that, and then talk a little bit about 2024 and some things for you to possibly consider. In putting this presentation together, I tried to more so step outside of my role here as a vendor and really think about kind of state of cybersecurity through how healthcare, specifically, obviously, for healthcare organizations, hospitals, regardless of size, and some of the challenges that you may be facing. So I want to kind of provide a bit of a disclaimer and before we get into this, because this State of the Union is probably vastly different than any I've done in the past, um, for the most part. And for those of you that I have not met, I tend to be rather different in terms of my approaches to cybersecurity and my views on cybersecurity. And in putting this together and doing some of the research for this, um, I thought it'd be best to just be unfiltered. So that's kind of the disclaimer. I'm going to give you my personal views on cybersecurity, what we've learned, where we are as an industry, and some of the things I think that we need to be doing as an industry. So probably a little bit different than a polished, politically correct State of the Union, but hopefully I think this drives more value and importantly more change and evolution of where we are as an industry. So again, also happy to take questions or comments or feedback. So if you do have something you'd like to share or say, feel free to put that into the chat window. And also always happy to speak to people offline. So you can always reach me at jgomez@gocloudwave.com. So with that, I kind of want to go back and pull a story out of childhood. And that story is affectionately known as the Emperor's New Clothes. And some of you may be very familiar with this story if you kind of grew up in the same time period that I did. If you're younger, probably much younger than me, you may not be familiar with the story. So I'm just going to kind of surmise it a little bit. You can have these slides if you wish. And so I put a pretty deep, well, not a deep, but a more in-depth explanation of this story, right? But ultimately, we have this emperor who's rather vain. And these two people decide to approach the vendor and tell him that, hey, we've got this amazing cloth that can tell you if somebody is ultimately unfit for the position they're in, or just kind of stupid. They're not really somebody you should trust or consider their opinion. And the emperor is intrigued by this, right? They are very fascinated by the fact that there's a cloth that's been invented that can actually tell them these things. Now, the only caveat, as we may know, for this is that if you can't see the clothes, then you're obviously unfit or stupid. So even the emperor would not dare say he couldn't see it, and he kind of plays along. And there's a lot of kind of time and effort put in by these two swindlers who develop the clothing and actually create this outfit for the emperor. Um, I do think that this story serves as a very strong allegory about the dangers of groupthink and the importance of speaking the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may make us feel. And so I think this story is very relative to where we are today in terms of healthcare cybersecurity. But with that, I'm going to kind of continue with the story and see if you guys can pick up on some parallels. And ultimately, the swindlers build out an entire shop. And if, as members of the emperor's court visit the shop, the two swindlers, as we can see here in the image, um, actually, are pretending to put together this cloth. And obviously, again, you're not going to say, I can't see the cloth. There's nothing there, because that would be a failure of the test of your worthiness to be in the court, reporting to the emperor. Ultimately, the gown or the clothes, the outfit is produced, and the emperor shows it off in their royal court. Um, Now, from here, the emperor, everybody's astounded by how beautiful the outfit is and how well it fits, and the colors and the fabric and the polish of the outfit. Um, and then the emperor, as we know, goes out and parades in front of the entire town to show off the new clothing. When this happens, there's a child, right, that kind of points out, like, "Hey, you're not wearing any clothes. You're naked." And at that moment, we've got this revelation, right? This revelation, rather, that there is no clothes, right? This is kind of all a farce, and we've been duped, and we've got this groupthink going on, and we think we're in a better position than we are. And so this is kind of the foundation, I think, and speaks volumes for where we are coming out of 2023 in terms of the state of cybersecurity in healthcare. I think in many ways we kind of are in a position where, for the most part, specifically healthcare organizations have a challenge right now as to where they are, what their level of maturity is, given the adversarial threats that we face day in and day out. And I don't think that this is something where, as an industry, we want to be where we are. I think we've gotten there because of a variety of factors, including things like limited resources, limited funding, limited direction and guidance from regulators and others. But unfortunately, it's kind of continued to evolve. And we're kind of at this point where we really need to kind of step back and think about, is everything we're doing in cybersecurity really the right thing to be doing? And I, for one, would say no. I think we're way off the mark on what we should be doing and the things that we do. So, ultimately, I've kind of touched this. I'm not going to go into this. And again, you can have a copy of these slides. But I think there's kind of this false sense of hope or this false sense of security that's been created. And a lot of it does come from the vendor community, because I think there are a lot of promises made around the next new cybersecurity thing that ultimately just doesn't really make a difference or doesn't really change anything. And I think there's also regulators and a lot of people in the industry outside of hospitals that talk about what we should be doing or how we should be doing it. And ultimately, it really doesn't make a difference. And I can point to a lot of things that when I look at them and I really dig deep and try to understand, like, what is this doing to really make us more secure, it kind of falls apart. From a framework perspective, I often hear people, especially hospitals, they'll ask, well, do you have a SOC 2 certification or are you SOC 2 compliant? And SOC 2 is kind of a misnomer. If there was ever a bunch of swindlers around, I would say it's those that are driving the SOC 2 initiatives. The SOC 2 doesn't really make you more secure, and if it did, we wouldn't have the SolarWinds attacks or the Microsoft Exchange attacks or the Microsoft attacks or the variety of other attacks that have taken down corporations, right, that then have crossed the boundaries and led to insecurities within the four walls of an organization, such as a hospital. Another one that comes to mind are things like NIST 853, and although there's been a revision made of 853 recently, it still really falls vastly short of truly allowing us to really feel secure. Again, there are a variety of organizations, including a massive amount of Department of Defense and federal agencies that rely heavily on 853 and can demonstrate to you in audit after audit how compliant they are with 853, but yet they continue to get breached. And often these breaches, even with things like SolarWinds, that is SOC 2 compliant, quote unquote, are very simple breaches. These are not massive things that we would expect to see on a Jason Bourne film. They're pretty simple and straightforward that violate principles of security that we've had for a massive amount of time. And yet we're here to these frameworks, and for some reason, we still keep getting breached, or we keep seeing these monumental breaches occur. On a lower scale of this is things like putting our faith in NIST CSF. Similar, right? We can say we're NIST CSF, we've gone through a NIST CSF assessment, and yet we still see breaches occur. And in fact, many of the hospitals that we see that are hit by ransomware or other attacks are NIST CSF compliant or exceed NIST CSF. And for a few, there may even be 853, but yet we still see failure after failure. And this is kind of illustrating to me. I think this is, not something that we want to talk about in the hallways of Chime or HIMSS or wherever else we may go, because it is very uncomfortable, right? And it kind of calls out the fact that we have these kind of pearls or these ideals, these pillars of cybersecurity that we're all supposed to be doing, but yet frankly haven't made much of a difference. The same thing I think occurs when we think about things like certifications. And latest thing now is university programs offering different types of degrees in cybersecurity or CISP and systems. And yet, for all of the people that we have certified, I don't think there's a vast difference in somebody who's certified or somebody who's organic in their capability of doing cybersecurity. Mostly because I think we kind of just purport the same old best practices that we've been doing forever and really don't make a difference. So we're just teaching people bad habits as they go through certification or degree programs. And then there's the regulations. I think as well-meaning as or unmeaning, depending on your viewpoint and your politics, that they may be, things like HIPAA really don't hit the mark on what we're supposed to be doing. And that's actually a huge struggle for many of us, right? Because regulations help us obtain the financials that we need in order to put together cybersecurity programs. So if we are quote unquote HIPAA compliant, we may have a very strong sense of security, but it's a false sense of security because HIPAA hasn't been updated in I don't know how long, and it really doesn't speak to the current threat landscape. And this also talks to things like state privacy regulations, right? So we have things coming out of California and New York State, which ultimately don't or will not probably make any real difference. And for the most part, we're probably already doing the things that these regulations are asking us to do at a minimum level. The other thing I hear a lot is people asking for analytics, like, well, we'll be better off if we have dashboards or we have the ability to do analytics, which I also kind of find kind of weird because a lot of times I think what we're doing is shifting the reality of what we need, right? So we'll talk to the fact, well, if we just had better analytics, we'd have a better way of defending against, whoever the attackers may be. And yet I don't really see any security program that has had analytics and still withstood the test of time against attackers. It could be argued that organizations like Microsoft have a tremendous amount of analytics. In fact, they have a massive amount of analytics that they're analyzing day in, day out, and they still fell to a breach. Now, with each one of these, I think the most interesting thing, at least when I did the analysis on all this, is that ultimately it goes back to something I already mentioned. It's a very simple breaches that are occurring. Again, these aren't like the most sophisticated polymorphic genetic algorithms that are taking out major vendors or hospitals or organizations. It's often simple things. And I think this speaks to the fact that there's a massive complexity that we've kind of grown up with, right? So we tell ourselves that, hey, if you want to be really secure, then you should go and embrace NIST, right? Or, hey, if you want to be really secure, if you want your vendors to be secure, you make sure that they have a SOC 2. And if they have a SOC 2, then they're obviously secure. Or, if we follow HIPAA to the letter, we're going to be secure, whatever it may be. But I think all this kind of creates a complexity. And it may be, well, that this complexity is driven because we don't have any other place to turn or any other place to go because we don't have better best practices. So I kind of asked ChatGPT to help me with this, and I thought it was interesting as to what was found, just to kind of give you a little bit of foundation and what started me down this path of trying to call out that we're probably not coming out of 2023 in a really good place. For me personally, I thought that, hey, cybersecurity started somewhere in earnest around 2003. I'm like, that's probably when we got this all started, when we got all these practices and approaches and certifications and all the other stuff that we think modern day cybersecurity should be or is. And interestingly, ChatGPT said, well, actually, cybersecurity started back in 1970, early 70s. So I said, well, do me a favor, ChatGPT, put together a timeline for me, starting in 1975. And it did. And what you see here on the screen on the left-hand side is that timeline. And I find it actually rather interesting because as I go through that timeline and I start reading about the different things that have been done since the 70s, which, not date ourselves, but it's about 50 years now, so half a century. We've really been doing the same old stuff and seeing the same old attacks over and over, right? So the first concept of a computer virus started in 1975. DES, which many of us still rely on to this day, was started in 76. The first known computer virus was the creeper virus, which started back in 1978. And if you keep looking at this, like 87, we had the first PC virus, right? 90s, we introduced the internet. 94, we got SSL. We still use that. That's kind of our default encryption technology, which many of us don't deploy correctly to this day or have outdated versions. We had the Melissa virus, which many of us probably remember. I found the one in 2003, the SQL Slammer, really kind of eye-opening to me. So back in 2003, we had the SQL Slammer worm infection, which hit 75,000 systems in 10 minutes. If we fast forward to 2017, we see WannaCry with 150 countries impacted, right? And then this doesn't even, 2020, we have the SolarWinds hack. 2021, we see the evolution, the rapid evolution and success of ransomware. And 2023, we saw, the AI machine learning kind of focus, which continues to evolve into 24 and probably will for the next several years. But I think when you look at this, right, and you think of this goes back 50 years, and we're still talking about the same exact stuff. We have really not made a dent. And there's not been 1 year since all this started where we as defenders have done a better job at securing environments than attackers have done at attacking environments. So I kind of looked at this and thought, well, if cybersecurity were viewed as some kind of a treatment for disease, it would be hailed as the most ineffective treatment we've ever known, right? The reality is that as an industry, all cybersecurity, not just healthcare, is pretty much a failure, right? There's no real measure here that shows that what our practices are and how we approach cybersecurity is successful. In fact, most CISOs and IT security directors that I speak to or talk to, are extremely stressed out. We're starting to see the effects of burnout. People are scared that when I wake up, am I going to find out that my organization, my hospital was hacked overnight, right? I don't have the tools. I don't have the audience or the platform to speak to, right? I don't have somebody that I can turn to within my organization that can really help me drive and get to a point where I can truly be secure. So I don't think this is so much that people don't care or don't want to have secure environments. I think we ultimately all want to have very secure environments, but unfortunately, the way that this has kind of grown up and evolved, we're kind of still using very dated approaches and things that just haven't worked in the past. And yes, that is compounded by the lack of economics or lack of resources that we may have. But even in a situation where I've asked people over the past several months, if I gave you unlimited amounts of money, would you still sleep better at night? Would you still feel that given everything we have today for cybersecurity, and you could buy any solution, you could implement any framework, you could do anything you wanted, do you still feel you would be 100% able to sleep better at night? And the answer is often no. And we know that that's probably true because NSA and CIA have both been hacked, right? If we look at the timeline here, not only did Edward Snowden leak the NSA documents back in 2015, but we also know that a lot of malware was developed based on NSA hacks that leaked into the general population. So, this is kind of a grim picture. And as far as State of the Unions go, it's not the most happy-making State of the Union, but it is reality. And I think there is a responsibility by everybody in the industry, whether you're a vendor or you're part of a healthcare organization, or you're an industry pundit, or you're a regulator, to kind of say, what we're doing is not working, and we need to go in a different direction. Now, I don't think that direction is so vastly different than what we've been doing, but there is definitely a course correction that has to occur. There is a different psychology and philosophy that we need to embrace, because just continuing to kind of do the same things and year after year repeat the same stuff isn't really working. And it's sad because pretty much, again, when I talk to others, both in hospitals and vendors and strategists, pretty much everybody will say, and I'm sure everybody on this call will say, well, that's not a matter of if you get hacked, it's a matter of when. And that's a pretty sad standard if you think about it, right? I mean, it just really is not a good kind of place to start from. Now, I get it that it's part of a reality that we live in, but maybe we should be working on, hey, let's eliminate the when and kind of reduce it back down to if, right? So I think there is hope, right? I do think that there is, as we transition out of 23 into 24, there are certain things we can do. And some of these things we're going to have to do, whether we like to do them or not. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. But ultimately, I do think it's not just all grimness and sadness, although I think we do have kind of a big hole that we've dug ourselves into and we need to get out of. I can tell you right now, if I probably presented any of this to any board of directors across the country, that's a hospital board of directors, they were probably pretty outstanded or pretty shaken by the fact that, wow, we never really realized just how long we've been at this and how poorly we're doing. So we do need to make a change. And that change could be something you do on your own, or you do as a partnership with a vendor, or however it is. But I do think that there needs to be a change in how we approach cybersecurity, and we can no longer continue to believe that what we've done for the last several decades is going to carry us forward, especially with the emergence of AI. So what I would tell you is one of the first steps is to simplify. Part of the problem I think we have here is that we've introduced a massive amount of complexity. And this is something that, it kind of hit me years ago when I was doing more software development and engineering. One of the things that I always found kind of weird whenever I talk to software engineers is just how complex they make code, or how complex and they make their architectures. In most cases, you could just use a simple approach and get to the same place, and it actually performs better and is more reliable. Now, when we think of cybersecurity, I think we're in the same place. Somehow or another, because of all these different things, whether they're frameworks or certifications or regulations or whatever they may be, or analytics, we've really made this very, very complicated, right? We continue to try to push for the next framework, and we miss really kind of what we should be focusing on. Now, for those of you who don't know, one of the things I do on the side is teach law enforcement and military special operations teams about shooting. And one of the things that you'll hear most shooting instructors talk to is front sight focus, staying remained on your front sight. Now, the other piece of that is make sure your front sight is aimed at the target you intend to hit. So the ability for us to evolve, to really move things forward in a manner that provides us with confidence, I think is really about reducing complexity. We need to focus on the basis. We need to figure out what is our front sight focus. We need to figure out what are the targets that we're going to go after in 2024. And if we can simplify things, I think that we will see a tremendous evolution in the effectiveness of our defenses. And really, that's what we're trying to do, right? Of course, we're trying to meet regulations and meet compliance standards and all of that, but ultimately we do that by having very effective defenses. And I think the best defenses we can have are basically simple, right? We don't want to make things more complicated than we need. And in fact, it's kind of a quandary we're in, because when we do things that are very complicated, we quickly figure out we don't have the resources or the money to do it. When we simplify, we start to realize, like, you know what, maybe we do have enough resources. Maybe we can do this within the budgets we have. I'm not saying that's perfect for everybody, but ultimately, I think simplifying cybersecurity and getting away from some of the craziness that we've tried to implement and evolve over the last 50 years is a good step forward. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you're probably going to be getting some help in this, right? And having to, and getting what I would consider some government push in the right direction. And what you see here on the screen, if you're not familiar with it, and I want to thank and call out Christine Sublet from Sublet Consulting, who kind of brought this to my attention. And if you haven't worked with Sublet Consulting, I urge you to reach out to them. But ultimately, there is a program coming online. And I think we're in the request for comment period at this point, but it's supposed to be moving very quickly. Now, I haven't driven very deeply into this, but I do suggest that you take a look at this HPH program. Now, the reason I think this is important is because this is ultimately being teed up to be tied to CMS, Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement. Right. So one of the things they're trying to do with this is they're going to be saying, hey, if you don't meet these performance goals, these standards, you're going to be in a position where ultimately you don't get Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement. And I think that is a huge upside for IT and IT security teams, because now what you're doing is on par with the clinicians, right? So you have to have certain clinical treatments, or certain never events can't occur, or certain things of that nature. Well, now you have to have a minimum set of security practices, and they have to be funded, or guess what? The hospital won't see the revenue that it's expecting. So I think this is ultimately a good thing. It gives you a foundation, a platform to point to that says, this is why I need this, because if we don't have this, we're not going to get the funding we need. So I think this makes things much simpler in terms of how do we pay for the things we need. And we don't need to go get really crazy complicated. Now, I'm going to show you real quick the website here. Hopefully this will work, because sometimes. So let's see. Yep. Okay. So you should be able to see my screen. So this is the website, and I think they're on the right track. When we think about everything we've come from and the complexity and the holes we've created, I think this is a good way to kind of return back to basics and get simple. So when we look at this on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see these are some essential goals. And I think all of us would look at this and go, yep, those are the things we need to be doing, but we need to be doing them very well, right? We need to assure that these things are happening consistently within our organization. And now what HPH does, if this all comes to fruition, is it will give us a funding mechanism, right? Because again, if you're not even doing the essentials here, you will not be hopefully getting reimbursement for CMS. So these are kind of the basics, right, on the left-hand side here. And I don't think these are, again, things that we haven't talked about, but again, I think this simplifies it, right? If you're able to basically go into your organization and show that these items are being done, then you're good to go. You have a strong security foundation. On the right-hand side of the screen is the enhanced goals, right? And this is having things in place that are probably a little bit more intermediate. I wouldn't call them advanced. I think enhanced is actually probably a good word that they've chosen. But I think the combination of these two does help us get to a point where we're doing the appropriate amount of cybersecurity to assure that we have effective defenses and that we can respond in a timely manner if need be, if somebody does get past those defenses. In any case, I'll leave this to you guys to look for. The URL's up here if you want to take a screenshot. And at some point in the future, I think it'd probably behoove us to do a deep dive webinar on this. But I think this is kind of, you know, a return to simplification. Let's just get the basics under control in a great way. So that is kind of one piece there. So I'm going to go back to the slide deck. You hold on for a second. Yeah, hoping this. Okay. Whoops. Sorry. 1 second. Sorry. Hold on. Let me see why this is not sharing correctly. Okay, so hoping you guys can see my screen. If not, Laura, let me know that you can or can't. So anyway, I think this is a first step, and you do need to start pushing your organizations in 2024 to get to at least those essential goals being met, especially because it very well could be tied to your performance goals. So what happens? How do we continue to simplify? How do we keep doing things that ultimately could provide us with ongoing abilities to reduce complexity? So one is time-based incident response, and I'll talk more about what time-based incident response is in a moment. But one of the things that we have seen over the past several years, and this has gotten worse and worse actually, is that incident response plans and playbooks have become really complicated. And what's interesting to me is most of the time, actually not most of the time, I have yet to see any incident that I've been involved in or any tabletop that I've actually developed or run that somebody has actually used their incident response plans. So the challenge here is that they've become so complicated, they're probably not meaningful or useful. And so an adoption of something like time-based incident response, I think is something that would make a lot of sense and would help simplify how we respond. Things like deception technologies, they are very simple. They're simple to deploy, simple to use. Things like honeypots, honey nets, honey records are all rather simple to get up and running. Great thing about them is they are very effective, and they also work with things like 0 days. So I think getting to a better reliance on deception technologies is something you can do. You know, we've long been advocates of 24/7 real-time network monitoring with anomaly detection. Again, getting to simple things that don't require us to become analytics experts or Splunk experts or integrate 20,000 different log files. I think really putting the onus on, let's just try to get back to some basics makes a lot of sense. And so these are simple strategies, but I think they will continue to evolve. And I'll talk more again, as I mentioned, about time-based incident response. In terms of emerging trends, things that I think will change in 2024, and we saw these starting to change in 2023, but I think they're really going to take off in their own right as we see 2024 really kind of begin to pick up steam. The first thing is prioritizing patient safety. The one challenge I think we have really failed at over the past several years as an industry is prioritizing patient safety from a cybersecurity perspective. Now, some of this is because of the way we've been brought up, right? The way that we've evolved and grown. So for example, HIPAA has nothing to do with patient safety. It's protects patient data. But so is the same can be said for a lot of the frameworks we rely on, whether that's NIST CSF or 853 or whatever it may be, they're all focused on protecting data. Now, I think there is a shift occurring, and we've seen this, at least from the CloudWave perspective, happening over the last 6 to 7 months, where more and more of the tabletops that we do are really focused on being clinical. In fact, probably in the past 8, 9 months, I would say we have not done an IT-focused tabletop. And even the IT organizations that are reaching out are asking us, hey, could you really focus this on the executives and the clinicians? And I think that's appropriate. I think that making sure your clinical teams understand their role in incident response is extremely important. So I think you'll see more of this shift throughout 2024. I wouldn't want to say that the use of tabletops in IT is dead, but I think that tabletops in IT don't provide you with the value that most people are looking for. I think there's only so many times you can hash through what happens if somebody penetrates your firewall or you see a SQL injection attack, right? What we really need to think about is how do we prioritize our response around making sure nothing happens to a patient. So I think those kind of objectives will become very, very front and center throughout 2024. I do think, and I know for a lot of people, this is a scary thought. Now, obviously, if you're a smaller organization, this may not apply to you. But as we get into mid-sized to larger healthcare organizations, I do think the time is coming, if not already here, where IT security needs to be moved out of the IT organization. I think this is something that has been talked about for several years, and there are people on both sides of the fence that some, are totally against it, some are totally for it. But I think as we see regulations coming down, it's going to change that argument. So for example, what I just presented to you on HPH with potential ties to CMS reimbursement, I think that is an opportunity to say, hey, if I'm the CIO, do I really now want to be responsible for CMS reimbursement? Or is this better managed by a separate group who understands you have revenue implications? So you need to resource yourself and put the processes and the defenses in place that adhere to CMS reimbursement. And that'll be different for a lot of people, but this is a direct reimbursement issue, right? So I don't know, we'll see. But I do think that also the elevation of the CISO to a true C-suite member will probably start to occur more and more. And we've seen some of that over the past 6 to 7 months. I do think a continued reliance on maturity models. I think if you're still doing the old HIPAA assessments, or you're working through HIPAA assessments and doing all that, or NIST CSF assessments, those are somewhat dated at this point, right? I think the more effective approach has and will continue to be maturity modeling. And I think that will continue to evolve. Now, please note, if you're doing a maturity model, it doesn't mean you haven't done a HIPAA assessment. Maturity models qualify as HIPAA assessments. And most maturity models, if they're worth anything, would be crosswalked over to not only HIPAA, but NIST CSF and NIST 853. So the maturity models give you a much better return. But the more important part is they help you have discussions with non-technical team members around how do you prioritize security as you move forward. So I think there'll be a larger push on maturity models. In fact, the HPH stuff that I just showed you, this stuff here, I think will be easily transferable to a maturity model. You'll be able to see how many of the essential goals are you meeting and at what level, right? Are they fully implemented, partially implemented, or not implemented? So I think we'll see maturity modeling continue to evolve throughout 24 into 25. So let me talk a little bit about time-based incident response, because I think it's important to start thinking about how do we really change how we do incident response in order to prioritize patient safety and assure that we can do things in a much simpler manner. So today, as I mentioned, there's a lot of complexity around incident response, and I'm just going to touch on this. This is probably a full topic we could talk about, but the way to think about this now is when you're thinking about incident response, the newest practices are to prioritize patients first. That this is the first thing we think about when we're thinking about our cybersecurity incident response policies and procedures. The second thing is prioritizing staff. And then the third would be family members and friends of the patient. And the last thing we're going to prioritize is systems. Now, for most part, when we think about incident response today from an IT perspective, when it relates to cybersecurity, we probably are thinking systems first or data. And in the newer models that we're seeing that are more effective, we're seeing that the systems are the last thing we worry about. The first thing we think about is the patient. Now, this is a very deep topic. It's a very different way of doing incident response, but ultimately it is a much simpler way, and it's something that the entire organization can get around. We've been presenting this model of incident response now for probably the last 6 months or so. We've had a bunch of other, in fact, some very large university hospitals have reached out to us about how do they implement this across all of their organizations, because it is a much easier way to do incident response. And the way this works is once you have your priorities set, which this is the priorities, there's not really much that you change here, you get into what we call the criticality or liability window. And what that is basically you start thinking of incident response from your 0 hour up through 72 hours, right? So what we're thinking about as an organization is how do we go from the moment we know we have an attack all the way through 72 hours. And you can see at the bottom here how we prioritize things that from 0 to 14 minutes, we're worried about the attack. From 14 minutes out to 90 minutes, we're thinking about patient care and patient safety. We then get into staff care, family care, and system care. So it maps to our priorities. Now, the interesting thing about this is that these first 72 hours are when you will make the most liability shaping decisions of the entire incident, right? So if you're going to have downstream some type of liability due to patient safety or due to a staff member or due to something else, it will happen in these first 72 hours. There's some other interesting things here that we've learned along the way. Within these 72 hours, you're typically on your own. The insurance companies typically can't deploy resources or adequate resources within this period of time. So there's this window where your cyber liability insurance usually shows up after the first 3 days. So changing your thought process about how we've done incident response and everything we've learned over the past 50 years to kind of simplify it and think about, okay, who do I need involved? How is this going to work over the first 72 hours? Really actually has been pretty effective. And so again, we've been presenting this model for quite some time now, and we're seeing that there's a lot easier way of people getting their arms around it, understanding their role, what they're supposed to do, and more importantly, it's cross-functional. It's not just IT, because within this we map in clinicians and everybody else. So urge you to take a look at it, play with it, come up with your own adaptation of it. But I do think that incident response will vastly change as we move forward in 2024. So what about AI? This is probably the bigger question in terms of, 2024. And probably I think many people thought, hey, John's going to talk a lot about AI today. And I don't think there's a lot to talk about, right? In terms of how, is AI taking over the world? AI will obviously, I think we all agree, will continue to evolve, and it'll evolve both from a defender and an attacker's perspective, right? It'll continue to grow. Will vendors of all sorts, including ourselves, embrace and have AI offerings? Yes, I think that's kind of now the ticket to play is you must have some type of AI strategy as part of your organization, regardless of what you may be doing, whether it's cybersecurity or an EMR, risk packs, or whatever it may be. In terms of does AI change how you're going to defend your organization? As what we've seen so far, it's not really changing much, right? We haven't seen that, oh my gosh, because of AI, you're going to need to go put in zero trust networks tomorrow. We're not seeing that. What we are seeing is that you need to do more of what you should be doing, right? So you need to educate end users more than ever on potential phishing attacks. AI for attackers is making phishing attacks much, much more effective. The emails that are written are very personalized, they're very timely, they're using appropriate industry language, they're not having misspellings. So a lot of things like, I just went through here, a module on privacy or email, I don't know, phishing, and it's kind of dated, right? And most of us are using dated stuff because we're still telling people to look for grammatical errors. But we're not saying, hey, you could still get an email that is properly formatted and it still could be there. And the reason we're seeing that shift is AI. So I think it's important that we kind of still get back to the basics. Will AI evolve? Yes. Will it become a force multiplier for both attackers and defenders? Yes. But do I think the sky's falling and over the next 90 days to 6 months, we have to make radical differences in our security strategies? No. If the only radical difference I think we need to do is step back from the complexity and figure out how we simplify our approaches so that we have effective defenses that ultimately can defend against whatever it may be, AI or traditional attacks. So I don't think there's a lot of change here or a lot that I have to give you. Can I go into kind of all the different types of attacks and talk to polymorphic and genetic algorithms and hive models? Yes, and if you want to do that, more than happy to do that with you. But as far as a trend and an impact for 2024, I don't think we will right now see a massive change other than we need to keep doing the good things we're doing, those essential goals that HPH is coming out with, we should really get those in place, focus on those things. And yes, user education should be stepped up because that's where we're seeing the brunt of AI being focused. I did ask ChatGPT, like, hey, what insight would you give healthcare IT leaders about cybersecurity if you were being honest and stripping away all formalities? What does the future hold? And so what you see here at the bottom of the screen is what I copy and pasted from ChatGPT's answer. So from an AI perspective, this is what the AI is saying, is their advice to you, the unsugar-coated, straightforward perspective from ChatGPT. So invest now or pay later. We've probably heard that before, or some of us have used that. I do find interesting this whole forget perfection, focus on resilience. I would probably change that to forget the complexity, focus on simplicity and effectiveness, but maybe there's a kind of crossroad there. Train and then train some more. I do think that that's a big deal. I think that tabletops are a really important way to learn what your organization can do or can't do. I found ChatGPT's feedback on get real about risk assessments really interesting and enlightening, and it made me laugh because I do think we are in a place where many of the risk assessments we do are just checkbox exercises. If we're just doing the same old HIPAA assessment or NIST CSF or 853 or SOC 2 that we've been doing, they are mostly checkbox exercises. They typically don't test anything. They're just kind of silly approaches. So again, I've talked about, I think there's going to be a move, and there's a continued move to maturity modeling, which I think is much more effective. And then I think the last one was a little bit ominous, be prepared for the unthinkable. I think we've all been waiting for a catastrophic cybersecurity incident in healthcare for some time now. And, I think there are some couple close calls that have occurred that are not publicly talked about. As many of you know, we as CloudWave are an ISAO, an information sharing and analysis organization. We work with DHS and CISA, and we also work with FDA on issues related to national security. So I can tell you that yes, there have been some close calls, but nothing obviously that has really, gotten through, right? And if we did, we probably all know about it. But do I think 2024 will bring about this like sentinel event that creates a catastrophic cybersecurity incident in healthcare? I don't know. I mean, things are getting more sophisticated. Geopolitical situations are heating up. Will somebody attack a hospital directly? I would say probably not, but would a hospital be the fallout of a different attack? I could see that occurring. But I think as I look at it and think about a catastrophic cybersecurity event, I think one of the problems with these kinds of things, and this is again what ChatGPT wrote, is that we get so focused on that we forget to simplify and just go get the basics done. I think no matter what you think about or how you do it or how catastrophic an event is, ultimately you're going to fare better in that event if you have the basics taken care of, right? If you're doing MFA across the entire organization, right? If you're doing those essentials that HPH is coming out with. I think those are the things that are really important. Are you able to monitor anomalies on your network? Are you using deception technologies? Do you really understand the maturity of your organization? Have you simplified things down? And are you able then to kind of, once you have that in place, think about the next step, right? But the simple stuff I think makes the most sense, right? Are your clinicians able to respond to a cybersecurity incident? Do they know their role? Do we have simplified incident response plans that are time-based versus playbook based? These things I think make a difference. And if a catastrophic event occurs, again, I really do think you'll be in a much better place than if you just go focus on how you're going to prepare for doomsday. I did crosswalk ChatGPT's advice to our CloudWave solutions. Thankfully, for all of CloudWave, for everything ChatGPT came up with, we as CloudWave have a solution for, and obviously we'd love to talk to you about it. But that's kind of everything today. And I hope that ultimately what you take away from this is a call to arms, that we do need fresh thinking and fresh perspective in terms of how we do cybersecurity. So I do realize that I opened up this with kind of a beat down, if you will, on where we stand, but I think it's necessary. I think the time has come to go, hey, what we've been doing for 50 years is not working. It's not working economically, it's not working from a resource perspective, and it's certainly not working in terms of making our organizations more secure to where we're not all going to bed at night thinking, is this it? Is this the morning I get the call that my entire hospital's been taken out? We don't want that. And that's why our team goes to bed every night trying to think about how do we protect you guys. And I think part of it is having honest and frank dialogue, which hopefully that came across today as being passionate and caring about not just you, but every one of the patients that's in your hospital. So with that, I hope you found this helpful. Obviously, you can have access to the recording and the slides. Again, if you want to reach out to me directly, it's jgomez@gocloudwave.com. But Laura, I don't know if we have any questions. If not, we'd be good to go.
We don't have any questions right now. I did want to remind everyone of the upcoming schedules for the subsequent months, February, March, and beyond. We'll be diving deeper into some of the topics that John talked about today, some of the frameworks, and some of the incident response that he discussed. So I'll send that out in the follow-up email, but we will be discussing some of those topics as the year goes forward as well. Actually, we did have one question come in, John. It says, can you elaborate a little when you say maturity models?
Yeah, sure. Great question. Sorry, and I apologize for just assuming that people kind of knew that. So I think so. I think we do have a presentation somewhere out there on like the maturity models we use. But just the short of it, the maturity models usually look at several domains, right? So actually, hold on one second. The easiest way for me to explain it is take this HPH stuff and show that. Okay. So I'm assuming, Laura, can everybody see my screen, or can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
So it should be the website for HPH, right? So yes. Over here, the way we could create a maturity model, and the ones we use are from the Department of Energy, right? We use, as CloudWave, we use something called C2M2, and it's a maturity model that looks across 10 different domains and allows us to very quickly determine the maturity of a healthcare organization. And we've cross-mapped it and customized it for HIPAA. But I think, probably in the coming months, we will work to create a maturity model for HPH, right? Where the way it would work is, let's take multi-factor authentication, right? So there's a bunch of things here that HPH is saying. Now, they've done a great job of already crosswalking their requirements to these different frameworks. So what we would do in a maturity model is we would say, okay, you as an organization are using multi-factor. So there might be 4 areas we look at. Is it not implemented? Which obviously, if it's not, we need to work on a plan to get it implemented. Is it partially implemented? Maybe you're only using MFA for administrators or certain people. Is it largely implemented? So maybe everybody except your physicians and board of directors is using MFA. Or is it fully implemented? Right, so now we know that, hey, if I gave you all the money in the world, there's nothing else you can do. You've got it fully implemented. And so with a maturity model, we will look at each one of these domains and kind of determine how far along the path are you. And then that translates, there's a bunch of other things maturity models do, is we can start thinking of priorities, right? So for example, if you don't have encryption deployed, but you do have, and you don't have basic cybersecurity training deployed, we can prioritize that, right? We can say, look, of these 2 things, encryption might be the more important thing to do, which then allows us with executives to have conversations around how do we prioritize funding, right? And for everybody in the organization to understand that, here's where we are and here's what we have to invest in. And we can also then build out a 2 or 3 year roadmap of how we're going to get to largely implemented for all of these. It's rare that everything is going to be fully implemented. So hopefully that explanation helps. If not, I'm happy to go further into it. But that's kind of the basics on a maturity model. But hopefully that answered it. If not, again, I'm happy to go deeper into the maturity model. There's just a lot of benefits to it. The biggest one is people that are not technical, typically our C-suite and our clinicians, still can understand where we are from a security perspective very easily. Because they don't need to know all the intricacies of MFA and email security and all of that.
Okay, thanks, John. We did have one other question come in. Do you think ChatGPT will be used to create virus code?
Yeah, I use it for that. Yes. Whether it's ChatGPT or I don't know if you guys know, there's dark GPT, which is a derivative of ChatGPT that somebody took and created a dark GPT, which is completely built to do malware. Now, let me just say something. ChatGPT out of the box will not just create a virus. So if I go to ChatGPT right now, and I did a demo of this earlier on, a few months ago, where if I just say to ChatGPT, hey, I want you to create a virus for me, it won't do that. There are security safeguards in place. But if you can find ways to ask ChatGPT questions that seem legitimate, it will help you with that. So for example, if I said to ChatGPT, could you write me a Python application to inventory all computers on my network that have SSL version 2 and do not and are using the guest login by default, it will do that, right? So now it'll write me that program. So what can I do with that? Well, now I can deploy that and figure out a way to all the machines on your network that are running those insecure protocols. So I can then take that code and then enhance it. So it won't just spit out a virus, but if you're smart enough to figure out the right questions and prompts, you will end up with a pretty impressive piece of malware. Other questions?
There are no other questions at this time.
All right, well, hopefully this was helpful, gives people food for thoughts. Again, happy to speak to anybody that wishes to, and we will go from there. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.